Thank you for being here today. My name is Nadia, and I'm a member of the National Lawyers Guild Hastings chapter and also the Student National Vice President for NLG. And we are co-sponsoring this event along with World Can't Wait and Veterans for Peace, Truth Out, and Center for Constitutional Rights. And I hope I didn't miss anybody. We have a lot of co-sponsors, and I think the reason for that is pretty apparent. For those who don't know, the 10-year anniversary of Guantánamo was this week. And I think it's especially appropriate to be having a discussion about Guantánamo at a law school because obviously one of the main facets of Guantánamo is that it really skirts the bounds of legality. And also, you know, there are people at this law school, I'm a bit older, but there are people at this law school who were quite young when Guantánamo was open. And for many people in this country, Guantánamo is really a facet of everyday life. It's something that's always been around that might not really occasion any sort of particular concern because they are used to it. But I am old enough to remember that that is not the norm for our country. And I hope that that can not always be the norm. So I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers. They have done some great investigative journalism on Guantánamo. A lot of the stories from Guantánamo would not have been heard if it weren't for them. And it's really important, of course, to humanize the experiences there and to really give folks an outline of what's going on and why it remains problematic. Even after everything we've heard about Guantánamo getting closed or getting better, it needs to continue being in the forefront of any discussion of this country and the values that we have. And I just wanted to also give a shout out to the folks from Save California in the corner. For those who are concerned of issues of incarceration and unfair death penalty, we have an initiative here in California to end the death penalty and replace it with life without parole. So if you're interested in signing the petition, and they have more information over there. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers, and let's thank them for coming here today.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming out. My name is Jason Leopold. I'm a lead investigative reporter over at truthout.org. And sitting next to me is Andy Worthington. And I just want to say that Andy is a unique breed of journalist. In my mind, he's cut from the same cloth as I.F. Stone, if anyone remembers who I.F. Stone was. And what makes Andy so special in terms of what he covers about Guantánamo is that he really digs deep into the issue. I'm always reminded that it's not just an issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a legal issue. But the work that Andy has done over the years is truly remarkable. And if you haven't checked out his website, andyworthington.co.uk, you're really missing out because Andy goes deep into these, into the habeas corpus files, into really giving everyone insight into who these prisoners are, and truly humanizing them. And if it weren't for Andy's work, I think the public would be shortchanged in terms of not being aware of it. So, this is an issue that we both cover that we're both very passionate about, and passionate about because we've seen the injustice that has continued over the past decade. So today, I think we just want to have sort of a conversation discussing, Guantánamo, perhaps what's left to be revealed, some of the cases on torture, the National Defense Authorization Act. But before we do that, Andy, is there anything that you wanted to say about your own work and things like that?
Well, I'll just introduce myself to people who don't know me. I know some of you I do know, and it's great to see you here, and it's great that everybody is here, has come today. Because this is a significant week, being the 10th anniversary of the opening of Guantánamo. And I think that although it's very heartening to find people who are interested, it would be fair to say that in the mainstream media, what we've seen is people noticing that there was an anniversary on and then moving along. What we've seen is that a lot of people don't really care. And the longer Guantánamo has gone on, we've seen a dropping off of interest in some ways. There are a variety of reasons for that. One is that it was very easy for people to mobilize opposition against President Bush and former Vice President Dick Cheney. And it's much more difficult what happened since President Obama was elected, because of course he promised to close the prison. He led many people to believe that was going to happen. He led many people to believe that that has happened. It didn't happen at all. It's now 3 years since he made that promise, and the prison is still open. People, I think, unfortunately, too many people have decided that they're no longer interested in this topic. Perhaps they don't realize that it strikes to the very heart of what it means to be an American and the principles on which this country was founded. Perhaps there are still more people than I think who believe that it's all been sorted. Or as I've been hearing in some places, perhaps they believe that if President Obama couldn't close it, there must be difficulties that we don't know, the kind of things that we mere mortals are not told about. I was actually at a press launch of the January the 11th event in Washington, D.C. yesterday, when one of the journalists in the audience, I don't know where she was from exactly, but she raised exactly this question, and I found myself quietly enraged. So that at the end, I just made a statement about what she'd said, and to make the point that the dark secret that she was hinting there might be, that there are these dark secrets that the president can't tell us about the truth about the prisoners at Guantánamo, that actually it's much more mundane than she was making out of some huge national security secret. What it's about is cruelty and incompetence and embarrassment. It's about issues in which senior officials and senior lawyers are responsible for things that might rise to the level of war crimes. But above all, it's about the torture and abuse and coercion and bribery that was in Guantánamo, the creation of a kind of house of cards of evidence built out of nothing except the testimony of prisoners and their fellow prisoners who were abused or persuaded in other ways to produce what masquerades as the evidence. And that's the true secret. The true secret at the end is incompetence. It's not anything big and dark and clever. It's incompetence. And I can understand that people don't want to reflect on how their government told them that there was a huge threat and responded to it by essentially rounding up people without the appropriate care, buying prisoners, deciding that they were significant when they weren't, for the most part, then deciding to abuse them, then deciding in certain cases to actually torture people because they thought they had information that they didn't have, and then to hide the fact that this was all a disgrace and incompetent and shameful. And I think shame is where we're at now after 10 years of how can we persuade people with power and responsibility in this country and members of the American public who don't care. But I'm kind of thinking how we can make the decision makers care, that this is a shame and that it remains a shame. And Jason and I hope we'll talk in a bit when I finally shut up and we move on to something else, about exactly why there are 171 prisoners there and why they can't leave. But it's a shame because the prison could be closed. It could have been closed. And it hasn't because there's a lack of political will or there is deliberate political obstruction. And what I hope that we'll be able to achieve, those of us who care about this, is that we'll be able to focus on perhaps trying to take this message out to lawmakers individually to say, we know essentially that you people care about how you will be thought of. It isn't all just about short-term political gain and expediency. You want to be remembered as a good man or woman who tried to do a good job. You will not be remembered that way. No one in a position of responsibility will be in the United States if they consistently and persistently fail to close Guantánamo, because the longer it goes on, the more shameful it will be. 2 people died there last year. The last living prisoner left over a year ago. After that, the last 2 people to leave were dead. They left in coffins. That will continue to happen. More and more people will die in a prison where they've been detained arbitrarily, where they haven't been charged or tried, where the years go on and on and on because it proved to be politically difficult to close something that is clearly wrong. So I'm kind of thinking that that's maybe one of the focuses that we need to start having, is how to shame these people, how to say your legacy will be tarnished, and I think that these people care about these things.
Totally agree. And one thing that I've noticed with the 10th anniversary is that the public has a very short attention span, unfortunately, with regard to the history of Guantanamo. And just to very briefly bring you back to 2001, originally the Bush administration had wanted to bring the prisoners captured after 9/11 to Guam, but because Guam fell under U.S. law, federal courts, they would have jurisdiction over some of the cases there. Donald Rumsfeld, the former Secretary of Defense, David Addington, who was Dick Cheney's lawyer, they worked with John Yoo at the Justice Department. I'm sure everyone is familiar with John Yoo up here in this city. And he put together a legal memo, which came out on December 28th, 2001. Just a day before, on December 27th, Donald Rumsfeld held a press briefing, and he was asked, why are you choosing Guantanamo? And he said, well, it's the least worst place. But what he was not telling reporters, the public, is that legal memo that John Yoo had prepared specifically said that we should use Guantanamo, and the reason is because it would be outside of the law, that the courts would not have any jurisdiction, they could not challenge their detention. And so we saw, obviously years later, that John Yoo was wrong. But what I wanted to actually start with regard to the 10th anniversary is, what is left, Andy, to reveal about Guantanamo at this point? What is not just closing it, but there obviously have been some serious crimes is an understatement. What do you think is left to reveal? Because you have regular conversations with some of the detainees, prisoners that were there.
Well, I would say, one of the things that remains to be revealed is not just about Guantanamo. It's about the people who were held in other locations before. So were held in those secret facilities run by the CIA, the black sites, or people who were unfortunate enough to pass through the other prisons that were run on behalf of the United States government under the Bush administration in Syria and in Egypt and in Morocco and in Jordan. But it's particularly the people who went through the secret CIA prisons. And there were 14 high-value detainees who were moved into Guantanamo in September 2006. Now, they had been held for between 1.5 and 4.5 years in these secret prisons, the black sites, completely unknown to the public, or not declared that they existed in these facilities at all. And they were moved to Guantanamo in September 2006. A handful of other prisoners were moved in after that, the last prisoners to arrive at Guantanamo, and the administration decided that 2 of these guys were high-value detainees as well. That's make 16 in total. Now, the thing about Guantanamo that I'm not sure everybody always knows about is how difficult it is to get information out of there. I've worked with information that has been produced either through lawsuits that were filed by media organizations, including the Associated Press, that was extremely important, those documents that were the basis of my work. Last year I worked with WikiLeaks. I'm happy to talk about that later if people want to know more about that project, which is obviously not something that came about through any legal means within the United States, but is extremely important. But information coming out of the prison by any other means is extremely difficult to come by. The attorneys who represent the prisoners, since they were first given habeas corpus rights by the Supreme Court in June 2004, and the attorneys first started to visit the prisoners and to start to come across all these alarming stories that the prisoners were telling them, every word that is spoken between these people is presumptively classified. Every single word. So an attorney goes back home after seeing a client in Guantanamo, and his wife or his husband says, how are you, dear? What happened? Can't say a word. There is a secure facility, which is, I believe, somewhere on the East Coast in Virginia, where the classified documentation is held, where attorneys have to visit to read that stuff. If they want anything to be unclassified so that they can release it to the world, to the families, to the public, they go through, there's a review process. The Pentagon has a review process. It's always struck me as slightly amusing that it doesn't seem to be necessarily a very strict review process, in that they've allowed information through that was certainly used by attorneys to shock the world in 2005, 2006.
Well, just to give an example also about what's classified, there's a high-value detainee there, first one captured after 9/11. His name goes by the name Abu Zubaydah. And I have asked his attorney what he had for lunch. Just a minor little detail. It's classified. Cannot even say, what he has eaten.
This was my point, and I'm sure you can talk more about it, Jason, because you've done work on the case of Abu Zubaydah. But I think one of the hidden secrets of Guantanamo now is these high-value detainees, because in the cases of, I don't know, but I would say the majority of the prisoners where attorneys have tried to unclassify certain information, they've been able to say to me, if I ask them, tell me something about your client, they can tell me something. Every single word, like Jason says, but everything of these guys, it remains classified. Nothing has been made unclassified. Why would that be? Would it happen to be coincidental that these are the guys who were held in secret CIA torture prisons for all these years, and that the government is determined to keep a lid on any mention of that whatsoever? And I can't see that there could possibly be any other conclusion. So I'd say that's the big thing. I mean, the rest of what Guantanamo is about is unfortunately a matter of overcoming the incredibly successful propaganda that was used by the Bush administration to tell the American people, cower in fear, we are here to save you, we have put the baddest of the bad guys, the worst of the worst, in Guantanamo, and you can all sleep safely now. Who are they, sir? You don't need to know that. My work for the last 6 years started with my anger at not being told by the United States government who they were holding in this prison, and to find out who they were. And when I did, I discovered the stories of human beings. I went through the transcripts of these tribunals where, quite often people didn't want to talk very much, but some of them did, and suddenly leaping out at me were stories of human beings, fully formed. Somebody with a wry sense of humor who understood that this was all a joke, but wanted to get their story in. People who were annoyed, people who were funny, people who were emotional. Stories came out. And I've still been working on that, because unfortunately those stories have not got out enough to the American people. The WikiLeaks files that I mentioned contain more detail, not particularly about the prisoners themselves, but about what the government claims its allegations are against them and where they came from. And these are desperately important documents, because they reveal that although at first glance you could look at the file of any prisoner and say there's a lot of information here, must be a bad guy, when you examine it, you find that the same handful of people keep turning up. Unreliable witnesses in Guantanamo, mentally ill witnesses in Guantanamo, people who had decided for whatever reason, and I can understand it, that they were going to lie. They were going to tell lies about their fellow prisoners. Maybe they just didn't want the pressure anymore. Maybe they were told, how would you like to have some nice food every day? All of these things happened. And a handful of people, Abu Zubaydah's one, he keeps turning up regularly in these reports. He says he might possibly have thought that maybe he recognized seeing this man in an Al-Qaeda or Taliban guest house. They're mostly incredibly vague and pointless comments made by Abu Zubaydah, who was held for years in torture prisons, where you just think, the poor guy. They just keep showing him the pictures. They had pictures of all the prisoners, photo albums. They call it the family album. And there they are every day with this poor guy. Who's he? Who's he? Who's he? You must know him. I'm doing a document. I'm doing documents to analyze this, which I hope that it will eventually be something that people will use to say we need to ascertain exactly what happened. And this in depth will explain how it was built on torture and lies, essentially. The whole of this Guantanamo structure is built on that. But, the high-value detainees, Jason, people don't know that here are these guys, the ones that they put through the worst, and they've just put a lid on it completely.
Currently there are 171 prisoners at Guantanamo, and Congress just recently passed the National Defense Authorization Act, and Obama signed it into law on New Year's Eve. At one point of that, by the way, there's been quite a bit of discussion and debate and even protests revolving around the fact that U.S. citizens could be detained and sent to Guantánamo. I'm simply just quoting what's been on the internet. And of course, as you know, if it's on the internet, it must be true. However, one thing that has not been discussed in the context is that indefinite detention is a human rights issue. Regardless of the fact that it involves Americans, it's simply a human rights issue. And what this administration, and frankly, previous administrations as well, what they've done is they routinely put out press releases from the State Department condemning other countries for these same exact practices that we the way we conduct ourselves and what we practice ourselves here. So there's quite a bit of exceptionalism even from this administration.
Right.
But the point I want to make in that is that there seems to be a certain segment that truly does want to protect Obama, President Obama, not cast any blame on him and simply shift it to Congress. And I'm wondering if you can, in your research, in your discussions, what do you think the responsibility is of the president, and what role has he played in terms of keeping Guantanamo open?
Well, the boldest move that President Obama made was on his second day in office when he issued an executive order promising that Guantanamo would be closed within a year, and then kind of essentially did nothing. The day after he should have been releasing people, there were somewhere around 65 prisoners still held who had been cleared for release by military review boards under the Bush administration when Obama came into office. He could have released some of those guys easily, but he did nothing. He set up his task force of career officials to review the cases, career officials, lawyers, people from the intelligence agencies, what I always call, a sober collection of officials. This is not any extreme collection of people reviewing the cases. They were. I think it would be fair to characterize it as he inherited a total mess and then decided to micromanage it as a kind of law enforcement issue, when it shouldn't have been. It should have been broad stroke issues of let's get people out of here and get this place closed down. And his review board his task force spent a year reviewing the prisoners' cases. They publicly said that they would spend a whole weekend in some cases on one person, deciding what are we going to do with this person. And in the meantime, that allowed people to come back, and it allowed essentially the Republicans to, somebody kind of leant down and picked something up. Well, what's this? And I went, it's Dick Cheney's fear card. Let's use this one again. We can't lose on this one. We'll just scare the American people, and we'll say to Obama that we're tough on terrorism and he isn't, because he's not doing anything. He missed his opportunity to really preempt that, and then when it started happening, he absolutely refused to fight it. And there are a few examples that are worth citing to demonstrate that. There aren't hundreds. If we were looking for some other worrying things about him, I would say that he's the man who ordered the assassination of an American citizen in Yemen because he didn't like what he was writing on the internet, and had him killed without any form of due process. I don't think...
Along with his son.
Along with his son, yes. But the failures, particularly when it comes to Guantanamo, is that Greg Craig, the man who was behind the executive orders, the man who took it seriously, the message that, hey, my boss wants us to close this place.
He's a former White House counsel.
Yeah, and he resigned before the end of the first year, didn't he? Because he was kind of sidelined. He had a plan to bring some of the Uyghurs to live in America. Now, the Uyghurs are these Chinese prisoners who were, they'd been running away from oppression at home. Some of them had been trying to get through to Turkey and Europe to work. They couldn't get through the borders. Somebody said, there's a settlement in Afghanistan where you guys can live. Some other of these guys had wanted to go and get, they had a gun at this camp. They wanted some training so they could, in their imaginations, rise up against the Chinese government. Guys, this wasn't going to happen, but You know, they're just a bunch of refugees, essentially, from this oppressed part of China. They're there, the US invade in October 2001, the camp gets bombed, they run away to Pakistan, Pakistani villagers greet them and then sell them to US forces. They end up in Guantanamo. What are we going to do with these guys? Everybody realizes, or most people in the Bush administration realize quite quickly, these are nothing to do with anything, but we can't send them back to China. You know, they at least recognize that. A bit of an irony, really. After the torture in US custody, they can't send them back to torture in China. But they stuck to that. They found homes for some of these men in Albania in 2006. President Bush delivered a huge amount of cash to Albania, who took 5 of these guys. They're left with 17 of them in Guantanamo. They win their habeas corpus petition in October 2008. The judge says the government has given up pretending they're enemy combatants, almost uniquely in these guys' cases. So the judge says, these are innocent men then, you're holding them at Guantanamo, that's unconstitutional. Bring them to my courtroom next week and we'll free them in the United States. There was a Uyghur community in Washington, D.C. that would look after them. There were other people in Tallahassee, Florida, in fact. A settlement there of people wanted to take them in.
This was actually moving forward. This was something that in Obama's first year in office, they were moving forward to settle them in the U.S.
So we're at the end of the Bush administration now, but the Bush administration appeals. The right-wing, very right-wing Court of Appeals that I hope we have a chance to talk about in the D.C. Circuit Court,
just gonna actually go there.
They say, okay, yeah, well, there's a stay on that. Obama comes in, his Justice Department carries on Bush's position. So a full panel of the Circuit Court listens to the case and says, yeah, you're right, we're not letting these guys into the U.S. It's an immigration issue, it's to do with the executive. Judges are not allowed to rule on this. End of the matter. This is the point at which Greg Craig says, oh, that doesn't seem right to me. And he says, if we're going to get this place closed, we need the help of our allies around the world. How is it going to look to them when we say, will you take one of these guys? And they go, are you taking any yourself? And you go, no, we're not. You are, we're not. So he was going ahead with it. The plan was to settle these guys in the D.C. area, few of them at first. He'd spoken about it to Defense Secretary Robert Gates. He'd spoken about it to Hillary Clinton. Everybody was ready. And then some dreadful Republican got a hold of it. Can you remember which one it was?
Wolf.
Yeah. Peter Wolf, is that his name?
No, King.
Peter and the Wolf. Peter King.
Peter King from New York, who is okay with the IRA, but is just not okay with Muslims.
And he said he was going to cause a big fuss about it, and President Obama caved. Now, that was entirely his responsibility. He should have said no. More importantly, can you imagine, these guys ended up being rehoused in Bermuda, where they got a job on a golf club. And the world's press turned up and found a bunch of really nice guys who had been in the wrong, really so absolutely the wrong place and the wrong time. Imagine if they'd come over here, anywhere in the United States, and you had Fox News and you had the right-wing pundits trying to milk this story for, look, they let the terrorists loose in the United States. There's no story to hang your terrorist rubbish on, because they never were terrorists, and it didn't happen. And that was, immensely disappointing.
And that brings me to the next question, which Andy's book, The Guantanamo Files, and at its peak, Guantanamo had 779 prisoners. Your book has 774 before the last 5 were there. But the vast majority were, in fact, innocent, were they not? I mean, this is what Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson had actually stated. I'm not sure if people are aware about that, but in the case of one Guantanamo prisoner who was freed, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, the former chief of staff to Colin Powell, he filed an affidavit, or a sworn declaration affidavit stating that he knew that the vast majority were innocent, that Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld knew it, and for political PR reasons, they were, they remained at Guantanamo. So, in your work with WikiLeaks and these files that came out, these so-called detainee assessment briefs, it seems that one common thread in there was the fact that many of these prisoners were picked up simply because they wore a certain style of Casio watch.
Yeah, right.
So at its peak, Guantanamo had, innocent people, many innocent people.
Well, when those files came out last April, I mean, one of the things that the mainstream media picked up on in the week before Osama bin Laden was killed, so everyone forgot about the story then. But one of the things that some of the mainstream media outlets picked up on was they went through the files just reading, they must have been reading things very quickly. What can we pick out as to the assessments that were made? They make risk assessments and intelligence assessments of how significant people are. And they worked out that at least 150 of the prisoners were completely innocent people. Now that's an understatement because, you know, it's actually more than that. I would say that it's several hundred people who were just completely caught up because of intelligence failures, because they were being bought. It's not entirely true to say that everyone was innocent. The problem is, and this strikes to the heart of the war on terror, I think, really, is that many of these people were fighting for the Taliban or were involved with the Taliban in some way in their military conflict with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, an inter-Muslim civil war that preceded the 9/11 attacks that had nothing to do with it. Afghanistan was sheltering Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda, this small international terrorist organization. But the Bush administration deliberately equated the Taliban with al-Qaeda. So they ended up with a lot of insignificant foot soldiers who had been out there. Maybe they'd been told, you know, go out there and get some training and help fight with the Taliban a bit. It's good for you. And suddenly, on the day, essentially, the day that the United States invaded Afghanistan, they became U.S. enemies. There was a court case where a judge pretty much said that. He said, you know, this guy didn't run away immediately when the U.S. invaded from where he was in the middle of Afghanistan. You know, we can hold him because he was fighting the Americans. It's like maybe he couldn't get out of Afghanistan quick enough. They had nothing to do with it before then. And the problem is more fundamental than it might sound, in that the justification for holding these prisoners is what's called the Authorization for Use of Military Force, which was passed the week after the 9/11 attacks. It authorized the president to do whatever he thought was appropriate to bring in anyone connected to al-Qaeda, or that he thought was, or who harbored them.
Currently being used to justify the drone war, which is taking place throughout the world.
And to justify the senator's insane decision that they want mandatory military custody for all terror suspects, including Americans, which is derived from Guantánamo. And the justification is the authorization for use of military force. And the Supreme Court said in 2004 in a ruling, yeah, this allows you to hold these people till the end of hostilities as well. Well, you can hold soldiers until the end of hostilities according to the Geneva Conventions. So I think the AUMF actually is a unilateral rewriting of the Geneva Conventions to cover the detention of people in wartime, and nobody realizes, or if they do realize, they don't care. Well, I think that that's pretty disgraceful, actually, because soldiers should be held according to the Geneva Conventions and protected by those conventions, and terrorists are criminal suspects, and they should be tried in federal court trials. And we're left with the same mess that we had under Bush, because President Obama hasn't tackled that. You know, all he's really done in legal terms, is that he stopped calling them enemy combatants. I mean, that's spin, you know.
It's belligerents now.
Yeah, his advisors said, you know,
Official word.
Illegal enemy combatants, that doesn't play well. You know, that's a bad term from the Bush administration. So let's call them these belligerents, because at least that wording comes out of the Geneva Conventions.
Well, you know, under Bush, it did appear that the prisoners were being released. They were, you know, when the landmark Supreme Court decision came down, in which detainees, prisoners had habeas corpus rights, there were hundreds of them that were being released. But currently, we're seeing habeas being gutted by the D.C. Circuit Court. Can you talk about that? I mean, what does that mean at this point for prisoners actually eventually being released? I mean, there are 89 that have been cleared, but they cannot get out of there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the ones who've been cleared, that's Congress's fault and the president's fault. So, you know, just briefly, the other great blame must be laid at the president's feet for the refusal to release Yemenis, because after the Nigerian guy, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalab, tried to blow himself up on the plane, and it was found that he was recruited in Yemen, when there was an uproar, and the president said, okay, I issue a moratorium on releasing anyone to Yemen. That was his fault alone. But he did that. And then Congress said you can't release any Yemenis. So, you know, that's the problem with those issues. But you were asking me specifically
Well, let me
about,
just ask
about
you,
habeas, yeah?
Yeah, and before we get to that, that specific decision, how much of that was a true danger that the administration feared, and how much was it purely politics, fear-mongering, the same type of fear-mongering that we saw you know, during the Bush administration when the Patriot Act was passed? I mean, what's your assessment on that?
Well, I just think it's politics, and you know, because there's no basis. If you were going to do something on a case-by-case basis, well, they'd already done it on a case-by-case basis. His task force had gone through these case studies and has said, we don't want to carry on holding these guys. The Bush administration's review boards had done it. I mean, I wrote an article for Truth Out, looking at, after the WikiLeaks documents came out, looking at how long some of these Yemenis have been cleared. There's some Yemenis in Guantánamo where the Bush administration said, we don't want to hold this guy anymore, in 2004. But they didn't get round to releasing them because they were worried about the security situation in Yemen. And then Obama's done the same thing. It means twice over, it means nothing to say to a prisoner in Guantánamo, we want to release you. It means the same thing as, you see this key here, I'm throwing it down the pan and you're never leaving here. It means the same thing. You cannot get out of that place. That makes such a mockery of any concepts of justice and the law, surely.
And then moving back to the D.C. Circuit Court,
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be something obviously very new, in which it does appear that the Circuit Court is simply gutting habeas.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, just to run through that quickly, the prisoners were given habeas corpus rights by the Supreme Court in June 2004. Why did the justices in the Supreme Court give wartime prisoners habeas corpus rights? Because they recognized that they didn't have the rights of the Geneva Conventions and that they were literally being held in a black hole. So, Bush's Congress decides to try and revoke these habeas corpus rights. And it takes until 2008 when the prisoners get back in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, Congress acted unconstitutionally. These guys have constitutionally guaranteed habeas corpus rights. The cases then started. The prisoners then were able to file their cases in front of the district court judges in Washington, D.C., who all got together to decide how they were going to do it. They got together to decide what kind of standard was required to detain people, because the Supreme Court hadn't spelled that out. Nobody really had ever properly spelled out what an enemy combatant meant. So the judges said, okay, well, we'll say that it means that you have to be part of Al-Qaeda and or the Taliban. So that fundamental problem I identified before, are you a terrorist or a soldier, wasn't addressed. You can be a soldier. You can be the guy who carried the toothbrush for a soldier. That will do. Or you can be, you know, somebody planning mass destruction on a huge scale. But at least they tried to codify what it meant, and then they started making decisions. And they had dozens of rulings where actually what you had was judges in the district court who were coming up with opinions that looked remarkably like what I and other people who've been looking at these cases closely for years have been saying, which was amazing. And it was such a vindication that they looked at the supposed evidence and said, this doesn't stand up. You see this guy here? He's mentally troubled. We've got your own report saying don't trust him. They identified these people who told lies about their fellow prisoners. They identified all of this. So a handful of prisoners were released. Somewhere around 24 prisoners, I think, were released as a result of this process. I can't remember the exact figures. It might be a bit less than that, but somewhere around that. Then the government started appealing, and the appeals go to the D.C. Circuit Court. Well, the most notorious of the judges in the Circuit Court is a senior judge, so he should have retired. You can't seem to get rid of these people.
Which judge is that?
This is Senior Judge A. Raymond Randolph. Now, Judge Randolph is notorious in legal circles when it comes to Guantánamo. He approved every piece of legislation that the Bush administration passed that was subsequently reversed by the Supreme Court. So, you know, he's there on record as being very right-wing, the kind of man that every decision he makes, Dick Cheney will be happy. And he and some of his other colleagues, you know, Judge Randolph last fall, he delivered a speech at the Heritage Foundation where he criticized the Supreme Court for giving the Guantánamo prisoners habeas corpus rights.
And I just want to say that speech is actually available on the Heritage Foundation's website, and anyone who is here that is a law student at the school, I certainly would encourage you to check it out, because it's he went off on the Supreme Court on that.
He quoted from the Great Gatsby and said, these were careless people and they broke things. Now, I would say exactly those words to Judge Randolph, because he and his fellow judges have decided that instead of the district court judges being able and it being appropriate for them to test the allegations made by the government and to balance those against the claims made by the prisoners, they've steadily, in ruling after ruling, been saying, you must give the presumption of accuracy to whatever nonsense the government comes up with. And we are hoping that the latest ruling will lead to an appeal to the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court will take up. Because in the latest ruling that was made, the judges decided that essentially an intelligence report made on the battlefield, made close to the time and place of capture, that could be based on anything, really, that should be presumed to be accurate. The problem with the Supreme Court, and I find this rather alarming under President Obama, is that under President Bush, those decisions that were made, those two habeas corpus decisions, and another decision in 2006 about the illegality of the military commission process, the kind of key person there in swinging the court the right way was Justice Stevens, who retired. And he's been replaced by two appointees of President Obama, one of whom, Elena Kagan, has worked on detainee cases before she became a Supreme Court judge. So she's not allowed to take part in them. So nominally, the way the court splits is 4-4 on any issues. If she recuses herself, it splits 4-4 on these issues, and there is no majority to decide that anything's wrong. So at the moment, Judge A. Raymond Randolph and his friends are deciding detainee policy themselves, and they have very literally gutted habeas corpus of all meaning. Habeas corpus, the great writ, which celebrates its 800th birthday in 3 years' time, has been destroyed of all its meaning as a remedy for Guantánamo prisoners by these judges. And I don't really think that that's known enough, because it's not really reported much.
I was actually just going to say that this is an issue, or again, this legal issue is completely underreported. People just seem to be unaware of it. In terms of, you mentioned the two habeas corpus cases. Which was the first that actually granted the prisoners right to habeas? Which case was that?
That was Rasul, yeah.
2004?
Yeah.
And then in 2008
was Boumediene.
Right. And there's a chilling first-person account that he had just written in the New York Times, talking about his imprisonment and torture. So, Andy, with that said, we just discussed the fact that the president, his own Justice Department, is literally appealing cases in which prisoners were granted habeas corpus rights. I mean, what is the purpose of that at that point? Why are they appealing?
I've never really understood what the motivation has been for how the Justice Department has been managed or not managed. I mean, the same people are in those jobs as were under the Bush administration, when obviously it was politicized. The aim was to thwart habeas corpus. There hasn't been any leadership from President Obama or from Eric Holder to say, can we join up our thinking even? So the Justice Department has lawyers preparing challenges to habeas petitions. President Obama set up a task force to decide what to do with the prisoners. It spent a year, and that's the task force that decided that 36 of the remaining 171 prisoners should be tried, that 46 of them should be held indefinitely without charge or trial because they were too dangerous to release, and that the rest of them should be cleared. Now, there's been no cross-referencing between those decisions and what the Justice Department is doing, to the extent that we know, because the Obama administration didn't publicly say, these are exactly these people have been cleared for release, these people are going to be tried. But we know by joining up the dots all over the place that what's happening sometimes is that the people that the government has said it doesn't want to hold the Justice Department is challenging their habeas corpus petition. It's just not, it's not sensible. I mean, they don't care. I suppose ultimately is what it reveals, is that they don't really care about any of this.
Well, in terms of not caring, I mean, that sort of brings me to my next question, which is, obviously with the National Defense Authorization Act, it does make it extremely difficult, if not impossible at this point, to see Guantanamo closed. There's clearly funding issues in which the executive needs the money to transfer detainees. The transfers have been prohibited. The public, for the most part, has tuned Guantanamo out, and everything has become politicized. So how do you propose that, first of all, that you can get the public back interested once again in these important issues, and what laws need to change? I mean, I mean, the Secretary of Defense has to certify the release of the prisoners, but do you actually see that happening? I mean, the Close Guantanamo campaign that you just launched is, an amazing initiative, but do you see this actually happening down the road?
Well, I'll tell you what I see about the NDAA. Two things, really. The first is that this, I must stress that the first thing that leaps out at everyone about the NDAA, which is entirely appropriate, is that in an unforced manner, your lawmakers, sat around together and obsessed about the terrorist threat to such an extent that they ordered the mandatory military custody of terror suspects who can be tied in whatever way to Al-Qaeda, that they said that they should be thrown into a cell without charge or trial for the rest of their lives. They said that with a straight face. They said that without acknowledging for a moment that conflicted in the basest manner possible with the foundation of the United States. Now, it remains to be seen if that will be implemented. I don't think that the president wishes to. A president in future might. I don't know how tightly that association with Al-Qaeda needs to be spelled out. But I think those things are kind of secondary to how fundamentally appalling it is that just about every single person in Congress who voted on this voted for it. They're all a disgrace. And I would say, that what's important, and maybe I noticed this more as a foreigner, because theoretically it's been easier for me to be an enemy combatant for all these years. But, I understand people's concern about this applying to U.S. citizens. And I absolutely understand that lawmakers had U.S. citizens in mind when they were doing it. But they had foreigners in mind as well. And where it came from was Guantanamo. Because it's been happening for 10 years in Guantanamo that foreigners have been thrown into a hole and held without charge or trial in indefinite military detention, mandatory. It's the same thing. So, I can't believe that I can believe it happened, but I believe what it really expresses is how out of touch your elected officials are with reality. And that, that either they're scared and they're disgraceful cowards, or they're scaremongers. And I think most of them are scaremongers. They're playing their fear card. That one that I picked up earlier that Dick Cheney left lying around. They're just playing that. It's an insult to you. We face in the West, in all of our countries, we face such grave economic problems at the moment. To have these idiots obsessing only about a spectral terrorism threat that they conjured up is a disgrace when it attacks so fundamentally what this country is based on.
What's truly amazing about this piece of legislation, by the way, is that in just about 4 years since President Obama has been in office, this is really the first piece of legislation that had true bipartisan support.
Yeah, right.
And, again, I just want to remind people that means Democrats. And there's, again, this notion that Democrats, because they're liberal, progressive, that they would not get behind this. And I think what the public seems to be completely unaware of is that the same type of fear-mongering, as you mentioned, that went on under Bush is taking place right now, but it may be a bit different in terms of their fists are not being shaken the same way, but it's still happening. I mean, it's stunning to me that Senator Carl Levin, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, he worked on this piece of legislation in secret with John McCain. So again, I mean, what what do you see taking place in terms of, I mean, do you actually see any prisoners being released at this point?
Let me move on to how that could happen, and I think it's where we all come in. So the provisions that you may have heard about and that some of you may know about in the NDAA relating to the disposition or not of Guantánamo prisoners. The intention's been there for at least a year since previous legislation to make sure that there is no way that anyone can be released from Guantánamo. So those particular provisions, there's the first one that requires the Secretary of Defense to guarantee that if a prisoner is released, he will not be able to be involved in anti-American actions. You can't make that kind of guarantee. And the administration has said, you know, Jay Johnson, who's the senior Pentagon lawyer, said those are onerous and near impossible to satisfy, and that's entirely accurate. And it's deliberately so. The other one, not allowing anyone to be released to a country where there's an allegation that a single person from that country has engaged in any recidivist activities. In other words, that any person released to a country has taken up arms or is involved in terrorist activities or plotting against the United States. How is that supposed to be fair? That's on a par with the guilt by nationality of the Yemenis, I think, where you can't be released from Guantánamo, not because of anything that you've done, but because you're a Yemeni. Well, that's it, yes. That's so unjust. This is so unjust. And my analogy that I've been using this week, I'll use California again for this analogy. A man is released from prison from California, and he commits a crime after he's released. And the Congress people get together and say, on this basis, no single prisoner anywhere in the US prison system who's from California will ever be released again. That's what Congress said to the president about releasing prisoners to countries where there was a single allegation of recidivism. That's outrageous. Now, there is a glimpse of hope in this legislation that most people haven't noticed. There is a waiver in the legislation which was imposed through, it was brought in just before the vote through discussions that involve members of the administration, that if the president is prepared to tell Congress that he is satisfied, he and his administration are satisfied that releasing a prisoner is safe, he does not have to jump through these impossible hoops. It means that the president has given himself and his administration the power to release prisoners. Now, will he do it? He looks unlikely to do it because anything that he does about Guantánamo rocks a boat that he doesn't want rocked and enables Republicans to speak up. But he could do it, and we can put pressure on him. And there is one person who is the first candidate, I think, that we can aim for. I have to say, first of all, how immensely depressing it is, to be honest, that 10 years on, the main thing that I'm focusing on and that other lawyers are focusing on is, do you think it's possible if we try really hard, we can get one person out of that prison, out of the 171 men? The man in question is called Shaka Amar. He's a British resident originally from Saudi Arabia. He has 4 British children and a British wife. The Bush administration said they didn't want to hold him. The Obama administration's task force said they don't want to hold him. The British government has said that they want him back. You see where this one's going? Where are the obstacles? The obstacles are in Congress. It was already looking difficult that if the political will was there, that you know, more than a handful of the most rabid idiots in Congress are going to stand up and say, you know, we think that old Great Britain is a terrorist nation. But everything is in place to say to the president, you can have the courage to do this one thing. I think that if people are interested in voting for President Obama, they should threaten him. They should say, you didn't do any of that stuff you said you were going to do. We're not going to vote for you. Maybe we'll vote for you if you actually do something. Do something. Do one of those right things. So it could be. We could do that. The man is Shaka Amar. We will be doing this in the United Kingdom as well. We'll be campaigning for him. And if I could ask you to do one thing to show your solidarity, it's to sign up to the website that I established with some Guantánamo lawyers called Close Guantánamo, www.closeguantanamo.org. There's a sign-up form. Honestly, we want hundreds of thousands of people to sign up. Can we do it? Maybe we can. If everybody tells everybody, if we mobilize on it, we will then be a body of people to say, we don't want this anymore. Not in our name. This place must close. There's also a link there to a petition set up on the White House We the People website. If that gets 25,000 signatures within a month, President Obama will reply. Now, honestly, do I think that he'll say, oh yeah, you're right? No, but it's another way of showing that the feeling is there. It's another way of saying, you have tried to marginalize those of us who care about these issues, and we will not be marginalized. I think, fundamentally, what your lawmakers did in the NDAA with the mandatory military provision is the most disgusting thing that ties exactly to the disgusting things that have been happening for 10 years, whereby, for reasons of fear and fear-mongering, people in positions of power and responsibility have utterly thrown away their regard for the laws of this country. And I really hope that you can sign up to this so that we can build a body of people to say, no, we do care about it. Thank you.
And just one note, thank you, Andy. And just one note about that is that the signatures that Andy talked about is that it will require, generating those signatures will require the White House to issue a response. We're going to go to Q&A, but I actually just wanted to make a couple of points about what the White House said this week. White House Press Secretary Jay Carney was questioned about Guantanamo's 10th anniversary at a press briefing, and he said that everyone knows what this administration's position is on Guantanamo, and we remain as committed as ever to shutting it down. That's a quote. And a couple of other notes in terms of where it seems like the news cycle is shifting a bit and bringing a bit more attention back to the issue of torture and just raising further awareness about it is that today, actually this morning, a judge in Spain said that he's going to move forward. I think it was a judge or a prosecutor going to move forward and open up the investigation into not the lawyers, but the fact that that several prisoners were tortured at Guantanamo. And what's really important to note on this is that they were waiting for a response from the Obama administration before they moved forward. They have yet to receive that. So, in the UK, we have MI5 and MI6, the intelligence services there, who were cleared, but they did say that one prisoner, Binyam Mohammed, was in fact brutalized, brutally tortured at a black site prison. And then there's several lawsuits that were filed this week in which Freedom of Information Act lawsuits trying to further obtain videos and pictures with regard to the torture of another high-value detainee, Mohammed al-Qahtani. So it seems that the news cycle is shifting a bit. There's some more attention being paid to this. So, Andy, thank you very much for incredible insight, and we'll open it up to...
Well, thank you, Jason. Cool.